I don't know, what it's like for you from your perspective, but I remember, when I was a young punk rock kid, playing in bands and, that whole thing, I never even imagined that I could live to be 40.
Yeah,
Like,
right. Yeah,
like the Circle Jerks had that live fast, die young thing. And, like that sort of was the attitude that so many people seem to have back in the day, which may have been what contributed to such incredible music, because there was such urgency to do something now, almost as though nobody believed that they would really be around that long, and they had a lot of passion for what they were doing. And I mean, it comes out in the music.
yeah, for sure. I think, I lived fast, but I never thought about dying young. I always kind of, but I always lived with passion, and I always lived with purpose, and I always had drive. And maybe some of it was naive drive, but it was exciting. And I was in my 20s, right? So I still had lots
Right.
of energy, and like when you're in your 20s, like anything's possible. So why walk around thinking that it's not? I was probably more ambitious than most people that I knew my age. At one point I was in two bands, and I was working a full-time job, and I was running a record label, and whatever. But it was great. It was totally great. And
Wow.
it's kind of cool looking back, actually, for me anyway, and kind of looking at just the catalog of all the stuff that I managed to create. And I'm really, one of the interesting thing I think about the Seattle scene is that so many of these bands actually recorded, because it would have been just as easy to just be in a band and rock out and drink beer and not record, but so many of us recorded. And that's, it's great because you look back and there's all this history that actually exists. And I think there's probably a lot of regional scenes where that never happened, where maybe someone did a demo, but it never got released. And so they kind of disappear, even like this record that I mentioned, By the Living, good example. They recorded in 82 and then broke up. And, here it is 2021, and holy shit, this record is suddenly available.
So it's never been released until now.
Not to my knowledge. I mean, I think it was maybe, I think tapes were floating around and people were probably dubbing the tapes, but.
I mean, I know from my own personal experience playing in punk bands, in the 1984, 85, that kind of area there. I mean, none of the bands that I knew really recorded. Like, we did some demos and we put out a 45, but there's a lot of bands I remember from my town who didn't record.
Of course.
And of course now they all regret it. So what ends up happening is, you scour basements and people look for stuff and they find, live shows or like 4-track demos, and everybody's kind of trying to get this stuff out now. But, you don't know when you're a kid. Like, I have no master tapes from any of the recordings that I did when I was a kid. What do you think was a possible, determining factor as to why so many Seattle bands were recording?
I'm not sure. And I say that honestly, just because, these days recording is easy, right? You can get software and do it at home, and you can actually put together a home studio for it's pretty viable for like $1,500. But back then there was no such thing. There was no digital technology for doing home recording, and you actually had to go into an actual studio, and it wasn't cheap, and we were all poor anyway. And so I don't know, because early on in the early 80s, I don't think most of us were thinking in terms of like, we're doing something special. Even though we were in this completely isolated scene. Seattle was a city that most bands kind of skipped over on tour. And I don't know. I really don't have an answer. But maybe on some level, subconsciously, we did know we were doing something unique. I mean, I think of Skin Yard, like we had our first show in June of 85, and we're recording later that year for the Deep Six compilation, and literally recorded an entire album's worth of material with Matt Cameron just a few months later. Like it was always part of something that we knew we wanted to do. Like, we wanted to put out a record. And we did. We always recorded like so much of our stuff, you know. So I don't know. I don't know, but it seems like an awful lot of people certainly did.
I mean, you know, if you look back on the, you know, the Seattle history and the Seattle scene, the shocking thing is how well documented it actually is. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, with recordings and I mean, maybe it was because there was so much focus, you know, from the music industry, at least later on, you know, I would say,
Later
you know,
on.
post Bleach, if you will, or, you know, Alice in Chains, you know,
Yeah, but I
Dave
mean, I'm
Brown.
talking about records from 82, 84, 85. That was years before we even started to appear on the map.